Most people believe that winning a conflict requires courage, strength, and the willingness to strike first. They believe the one who moves fastest wins. They believe that hesitation is weakness, that silence is surrender, and that the boldest action is always the smartest one. Sun Tzu believed something entirely different, and what he believed destroyed armies without a single sword being drawn. Sun Tzu understood that the moment your enemy expects your attack has already failed. Not because you lack power, not because your strategy is wrong, but because a prepared mind is the most dangerous obstacle in any conflict. When someone knows you are coming, they are no longer a target, they become a fortress. And fortresses are expensive to destroy. Here is what most people never realize about conflict. The fight does not begin when the first blow lands. It begins long before that, in the mind of the person who is waiting. Every second they spend expecting you, they are. Building walls, calculating angles, and preparing responses. By the time you arrive, they are ready. And a ready enemy is not an enemy you can defeat. They are an enemy you invited to be your equal. Sun Tzu spent his life studying something far more dangerous than physical warfare. He studied the architecture of the human mind under pressure. He studied what happens when certainty is removed, when expectations are shattered, when the opponent is left waiting for something that never arrives. What he discovered was this: the most devastating weapon a strategist possesses is not speed, not strength, and not numbers. It is unpredictability. This video is not about physical conflict. It is not about aggression, domination, or cruelty. It is about the psychological principles Sun Tzu mastered thousands of years ago that remain brutally relevant in the modern world. In your workplace, in your relationships, in the quiet battles you fight every single day without anyone noticing. By the end of this video, you will see conflict differently, you will see power differently, and you will never fight the same way again. The first thing Sun Tzu taught was so simple, it sounds almost obvious, and yet almost everyone ignores it. He said that the greatest mistake a warrior can make is to become predictable. Not weak, not slow, not outnumbered, predictable. Because predictability hands your enemy the one thing they need to defeat you: time. Time to prepare, time to position, time to turn your own strength into their advantage. Think about this in your own life. You have probably encountered someone who always responds to criticism the same way. They get defensive, they raise their voice, they explain themselves in long, urgent sentences. After the first time you saw it, you never feared that person's reaction again. You knew exactly what was coming. You could time it, you could use it. Their predictability made them manageable. Sun Tzu would say it made them defeatable. Now think about the opposite kind of person, the one whose reaction you could never quite predict, the one who sometimes laughed at what others took seriously and sometimes went deeply silent at what seemed minor, the one who did not always engage when provoked and did not always retreat when pressured. That person made you careful. That person made you uncertain. And uncertainty, Sun Tzu understood, is the beginning of psychological defeat. Most people react to conflict instinctively. Someone pushes, they push back. Someone withdraws, they chase. Someone raises their voice, they raise theirs. They believe this is strength. What it actually is a pattern. And patterns are not power. Patterns are maps. And when you hand your opponent a map, you are not being brave. You are being foolish. Sun Tzu warned that the warrior who can be read can be controlled, and the warrior who can be controlled has already lost. But here is where Sun Tzu's insight becomes truly dangerous. He did not simply say, be unpredictable. He said something far more surgical. He said, never fight when they expect it. Not because fighting is wrong, not because conflict should always be avoided, but because fighting when expected means fighting on ground your opponent prepared for you. It means accepting their terms, their timing, and their advantage. The strategist does not accept those conditions. The strategist creates new ones. When your enemy expects your attack, and you do not arrive, something profound begins to happen inside their mind. The tension they built does not release. It turns inward. The energy they organized against you has nowhere to go. The mental fortress they constructed becomes a prison of their own making. They begin to question, did I misread the situation? Am I being watched? What are they planning? And that internal questioning, that silent erosion of certainty, is more destructive than any direct confrontation could ever be. Sun Tzu called this the power of the void. The human mind cannot tolerate emptiness for long. When there is no information, the mind creates information. When there is no movement, the mind imagines movement. When there is no reaction, the mind invents one. This is not a flaw in human psychology. It is a design feature. We are wired to fill gaps, to complete patterns, to find meaning in chaos. The strategist who understands this does not need to act. They simply need to be absent at the right moment and let the opponent's own mind do the destruction. Consider what this looks like in a modern context. You are in a conflict with someone at work, a colleague who undermines you, a rival who expects confrontation, a person who has been provoking you and waiting for your response. The instinct is to respond, to correct, to defend. Most people do exactly that. And the moment they do, the dynamic is set. The opponent is validated. The battlefield is established. The fight begins on terms the opponent designed. But when you do not respond, when you simply continue moving calmly, deliberately, as if the provocation did not register, something shifts in the atmosphere. The provocateur is left holding a weapon with no target, and a weapon with no target eventually turns on the person holding it. This is not passivity. Do not confuse strategic stillness with weakness. Sun Tzu was not describing retreat. He was describing a far more sophisticated form of engagement, one that operates below the surface, where the opponent cannot see it, cannot respond to it, and cannot defend against it. The void you create is not empty. It is full of psychological pressure that builds silently inside the mind of anyone waiting for you to behave the way they expect. Now we arrive at the principle that truly separates the strategist from the fighter. It is the understanding that rhythm is a weapon. Sun Tzu observed that every person, in every conflict, has a natural rhythm, a pace at which they think, a timing at which they respond, a cadence to their patterns of aggression and withdrawal, and he understood that whoever controls the rhythm of a conflict controls its outcome. Because when you disrupt someone's rhythm, you do not just slow them down, you remove their ability to trust their own instincts. Imagine a negotiation. Both sides arrive with expectations. They know how these things typically go. There is pressure, there is counter-pressure, there is a gradual movement toward resolution. Both sides have prepared for that dance. Now imagine one side simply stops, pauses, takes far longer than expected to respond, changes the tempo entirely. Suddenly the other side does not know where they are in the sequence. They do not know if the silence means strength or confusion, calculation or hesitation. They begin making decisions based on incomplete information, and decisions made under uncertainty are almost always mistakes. Sun Tzu knew this. He deliberately varied his pace. He attacked when it was unexpected and withheld when an attack was anticipated. He advanced when retreat was predicted and retreated when advance was assumed. He understood that the opponent's preparation was itself a vulnerability, because a prepared opponent has committed to a specific expectation, and when that expectation is violated, the preparation becomes a liability. The very strength they built to counter you becomes weight they have to carry with nowhere to put it. This principle applies with precision to everyday life. In any relationship where conflict exists, personal or professional, there is a rhythm the other person has learned to expect from you. They know how long you will tolerate something before speaking. They know how much silence you can endure before reaching out. They know the emotional sequence you move through when pressured. This knowledge is their leverage, and the moment you deliberately alter that rhythm, not reactively but strategically, you remove their leverage entirely. They are suddenly navigating without a map, and people without maps make navigational errors. But Sun Tzu warned about something even more dangerous than failing to control rhythm. He warned about the strategist who becomes so focused on disrupting the opponent that they forget the most important discipline of all, control of the self. Because here is the terrible irony of psychological warfare. The same tactics that destroy an opponent can destroy the person using them if that person is not operating from a place of genuine internal stillness. Unpredictability without inner calm is not strategy. It is chaos, and chaos does not discriminate between sides. The warrior who loses emotional control while attempting to appear unpredictable is not a strategist. They are a person in crisis pretending to have a plan. Sun Tzu was ruthless about this distinction. He did not teach erratic behavior. He taught disciplined variation. He did not teach coldness for its own sake. He taught the deliberate management of what was revealed and what was withheld. The difference is everything. One comes from fear and reaction. The other comes from awareness and choice. And this is where most people make a fatal mistake when they first encounter these ideas. They hear "be unpredictable," and they begin performing unpredictability. They start ignoring people erratically. They manufacture distance. They create confusion without purpose. And because it is performed rather than genuine, it reads as instability. It communicates not power but fragility. Sun Tzu's unpredictability was never performance. It emerged from genuine strategic clarity, from knowing exactly what you wanted and being completely flexible about how you obtained it. Here is what that looks like at its most advanced level. The strategist who has truly internalized Sun Tzu does not think in terms of reactions at all. They think in terms of positioning. Every situation is evaluated not by what it demands emotionally, but by what it offers strategically. A provocation is not an insult to be defended. It is information to be filed. A conflict is not a threat to be neutralized. It is a terrain to be studied. A moment of expected confrontation is not an obligation. It is an opportunity to reveal nothing and learn everything. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. For centuries, people have read this as a philosophical ideal, beautiful but impractical. In reality, it is the most practical military and psychological insight ever recorded. Because every fight carries cost, every confrontation spends resources, emotional, reputational, energetic. The strategist who wins without fighting does not just defeat the opponent. They do so while preserving everything they have, while the opponent has spent everything they brought to the battle that never happened. Think about what this means in real terms. The person who remains calm when everyone expects a reaction does not just avoid the conflict. They exit the conflict with more power than they entered. They are unread. They are unspent. They have revealed nothing of their limits, their fears, or their strategy. Meanwhile, the person who provoked them, who prepared for a fight and received silence, has done the opposite. They have revealed their aggression. They have spent their energy. They have shown their tactics to someone who gave nothing in return. The strategic loss is absolute, even if they feel in the moment like they won. This is the final principle Sun Tzu understood with devastating clarity, that the destruction of the mind is always more complete than the destruction of the body. A physical defeat can be recovered from. An army can regroup, resupply, and return. But a mind that has been made uncertain of itself, that has been deprived of predictable reactions, that has been left waiting in a void of its own anxious construction, that mind does not recover easily. Because the damage is internal, it is not visible. And what is not visible cannot be repaired with visible solutions. The people who understood this throughout history were not the most violent. They were the most patient. They were the ones who could sit with discomfort while others burned with urgency. They were the ones who could withhold a response for longer than seemed reasonable, and then deliver it at the exact moment it would have maximum psychological impact. They were the ones who made opponents question their own intelligence, their own perception of the situation, their own ability to understand what was happening around them. And once an opponent begins questioning themselves, the battle is already decided. Sun Tzu spent decades refining this understanding into something that could be taught, transmitted, and applied across every dimension of conflict: military, political, personal, psychological. What he left behind in The Art of War is not a manual for fighting. It is a manual for thinking, for seeing conflict as it truly is, not a test of strength but a test of awareness, not a competition of force but a competition of clarity. The one who sees the most clearly, who controls their own pattern the most skillfully, who understands the psychology of expectation the most deeply, that person wins, not always loudly, not always visibly, but decisively. Here is what Sun Tzu would say if he was standing in your life today, watching the conflicts you navigate, the people who test you, the situations that demand your reaction. He would not tell you to fight harder. He would tell you to become harder to read. He would not tell you to respond faster. He would tell you to respond less and more deliberately. He would not tell you to expose your strength. He would tell you that strength exposed is strength surrendered, and that the power you keep hidden is the power they can never prepare for. Most people live in conflict. Reactively, they fight when provoked, withdraw when overwhelmed, and telegraph their every internal state to anyone paying attention. Sun Tzu lived differently. He moved through conflict like water moves through stone, not by force but by persistence, by finding the path of least resistance, by shaping the terrain through presence rather than aggression. And the stone, no matter how hard, no matter how prepared, always yields. Not because the water is stronger, but because the water never stops, and it never arrives when expected. The lesson is not complicated, but it is deeply uncomfortable for most people because it requires something that feels unnatural. It requires you to delay the relief of reaction. It requires you to hold the tension of an unresolved situation without releasing it prematurely. It requires you to become comfortable with being misread, with being underestimated, with sitting in a conflict that has no clean resolution yet, because you understand that the resolution comes not when you force it, but when the conditions are precisely right. This is the art Sun Tzu mastered, not the art of war, the art of timing, the art of withholding, the art of manufacturing victory inside the mind of your opponent before the first move has ever been made. When you understand this, you stop seeing conflict as something that happens to you. You start seeing it as something you shape. You stop reacting. You start architecting. And the moment that shift happens, the moment you move from reaction to design, you become, in the truest sense of the word, untouchable. The next time someone expects your reaction and does not receive it, watch what happens to them. Watch the shift in their certainty. Watch the slight recalibration in their posture, their tone, their next move. Watch how an expected fight that does not materialize becomes a weight they carry alone. You did not need to win that conflict. You removed yourself from it entirely, while they remained inside it, fighting an opponent who was no longer there. That absence, that strategic, deliberate, deeply intelligent absence, is not weakness. It is the highest form of power Sun Tzu ever described. You now carry something most people never learn, not a tactic, not a technique, but a way of seeing, a way of moving through conflict that makes you fundamentally harder to defeat, because you are harder to predict, harder to provoke, and harder to reach. The battles you will win from this point forward will not look like battles. They will look like patience, they will look like silence, they will look, to everyone watching, like nothing at all. And that is exactly how Sun Tzu would have wanted it. If this video shifted something in how you see conflict, power, and strategy, leave a comment telling me which principle hit you the hardest. Was it the power of the void, the control of rhythm, the destruction that happens inside a mind left waiting? Drop your answer below. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of power, strategy, and human behavior, subscribe to this channel. Because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about how the most powerful people in history really operated. Stay strategic, stay patient, and never fight when they expect it.